All right, so here we are, and now we are starting the next section of this course, and it is called Philosophical Hermeneutics. We're going to do 3 lectures on this, and so that's why you've got a 1 there. This is the first of 3. And in this week, what we want to think about is rationality as judgment. So let me just lay out for you a little bit about what we're going to be doing. So what I do at the start there is I retell a little story from an article that appeared in University Affairs, which is a Canadian university trade magazine. And I found an article in there that I thought was really quite appalling. And I've heard this sentiment articulated before in circumstances that are pretty close to home for me. And it's the notion of overcoming our biases. And the phrase is used, even overcoming our unconscious bias. Well, if you take Freudian psychoanalysis seriously, if you take the notion of ideology seriously, if you take the work that has been done in feminism and in critical race theory seriously, then the notion of overcoming unconscious bias is an unrealizable one. Our problem is much more ingrained within us than we really want to acknowledge. And I think what happens is that things get used, even amongst academics, in a popular way and not in a truly philosophical way. The philosophy behind this is uncompromising. And we're going to see that, we're going to see that increasingly in the third part of this course, but also in this part of the course. The philosophy is uncompromising. And it's not enough simply to imagine that you're going to work a little harder or you're going to be a little more open to the view of the other to achieve a gathering of perspectives in some sort of a neutral space. The Greeks were aware of this from the get-go, and they called it hubris. They called the notion of achieving a view from nowhere, of having the view of the gods, as prideful. And that one of the things that humans need to achieve is a recognition of their limitation and their frailty. An imagining of life as having hidden dimensions, reality as having hidden dimensions. And what this does is it raises the question, well, what is the nature of the real? There's a word for this in philosophy that came into being in the 17th century. And that word is ontology, O-N-T-O-L-O-G-Y. And it simply means the nature of the real. Another word that's used in this context is sometimes used is the word metaphysics. And that also has to do with what is the nature of the real. Now, in the modern world, as we're going to see, our picture of the real, our assumptions about the real, or what it's made of, come mostly from science. And we think that science describes the real, and that if we have our own ideas, those are our perspectives. But if we really want to know what a thing is, we consult science. Perhaps we don't go into the laboratory, but we're thinking scientifically of relying on our senses and imagining that reality is measurable and that is determinable simply by our 5 senses. But in radical or philosophical hermeneutics, an important notion is the notion of hidden dimensions. Another thing that we're going to see is that our ideas of rationality are bound up with our notions of the real. So as we come to think of the real in scientific terms, we come to think of rationality as being scientific rationality. And we're going to see in this section, as I think we've already seen in the first section, that there are real limitations, problems with this. So this notion we're going to bring more to the fore now, and we'll see it as well in section 3 this week. So the theme here is rationality is judgment. And we are staying with the notion of completing the phrase rationality is with what are, from one perspective at least, negative judgments. Rationality is male. Rationality is white. Rationality is repression. Well, in that vein, rationality is judgment. In other words, thinking about rationality as critiquing or judging or making assessments of things, this is actually problematic. So we're going to continue to do that. We're following that trend. But we're also introducing positive redescriptions. And I'm going to do that now, particularly in the first couple of very short readings that you're doing for this week. So for John McMurray in the first reading, rationality is knowledge of things. And this is meant as a positive statement. So this is one of the positive redescriptions that we are now working towards. McMurray has this beautiful distinction that he makes between knowing things and simply knowing about things. And he describes how we spend a lot of our time in life simply knowing about them. We want to know things only for the ways in which we can use them. We don't really want to know things in and of themselves. That's what he means when he says knowledge of them. In terms of the words that he uses, it's a very fine description, but bear it in mind for reading McMurray. It's very important for the way that he's trying to talk about a key difference in the way that we think about rationality and knowledge. And what Gadamer wants to say is that there's something more important than judgment. So here, going back to the title, that rationality is judgment, judgment is a negative idea. And by judgment, he means that act of interpretation or discernment, puzzling things out. He means the kind of thing that we do when we do literary criticism, when we write essays, when we step back from a work and we want to analyze it, critique it, and say what's really going on in it. He wants to say, no, there's something else that is already happening before you do that. And he has 3 different ways of describing this. Pay very close attention to what's going on pages 4 to 7. Remember the number 3, which he mentions, and see if you can follow 1, 2, 3 all the way through those pages. Here's what you're looking for. In the first instance, he says, look, a work of art speaks to you. Before you try to puzzle out what it means, it has already reached you in some way or other. Secondly, in terms of history, we think that we have to learn languages and be sensitive to the way that people were different in the past. And he says, look, you're already connected to the past, that your very language, your very way of being is a gift from the past to the present. So there's something that's happened before you try to judge it. However unbiased your judgment is aiming to be. He says, that's not the point. The point is that it is already part of you. And thirdly, there's hermeneutics, and then there's hermeneutics. So early on in the 19th century, the word hermeneutics became really popular. And he says it's bound up with an enlightenment or scientific way of thinking about what rationality is. And it overlooks a more philosophical understanding of the true nature of hermeneutics. So that is what you're looking at in these readings. I don't mind saying that this is a really important pivot point in the course. If you can really, again, take on board the criticism of the first section, and you can make this turn towards a continuing critique of rationality and also the introduction of a different way of thinking about rationality, you'll be well placed for this next section of the course. So I wish you well this week, and good luck with the readings. All right, I'll see you again at the end of the week. Bye for now.